I was 21, recently became a police officer, and was also recently dumped, so my friend suggested Tinder. As a 21-year-old and new cop, I had the mentality of, I'm invincible and I can take on anyone. I matched with a very good-looking, out-of-my-league female. We chatted and eventually set up a date to meet. She said she had a great open field to look at stars and hang out, and we could meet up at her house. So the night came, I was excited, and she seemed to be excited when I picked her up. She guided me to the field and it looked nice. Open space, woods, deer, and other wildlife. In the field, I noticed really dim headlights in the distance. Then the van started driving towards us and pulled up in front of us, almost close enough to block me from going forward. I told her to stay in the car and I'll go say hi. I grabbed the flashlight I had in the car and walked up. In the front driver's side of the van, there was a decently sized man. I asked him what was going on and if he could back his car up a little bit. He was very polite, said he was the owner of the property, and said he didn't mean to scare us. He told me he's been having trouble with poachers on his property and just wanted to make sure we weren't going to be shooting at anything. I assured him we only came out to look at some stars and wildlife. He was perfectly okay with that, told me to have a nice date, and drove away. After that, the girl was texting non-stop. Around an hour later, I saw headlights coming towards us again, this time at a really fast pace. We hopped in the car and I moved it to a more defensive position. The same man came close enough to almost hit my car. She hopped out of the car at that point and ran towards the guy. I immediately knew I was fucked. I got out and gave them commands to back up and get on the ground. Neither of them complied, obviously. He then proceeded to charge me and knock me to the ground. Luckily, I was able to get him on his back and get up. I saw my date grab a metal pipe from the van. She told me they had a gun and to give them my money and truck, and I won't get hurt. Of course, with my I'm invincible mentality, I said no. She started to cry and said they didn't want to hurt me. He then started to go back towards the car. At that point, I told them I was a cop, drew my concealed firearm, and lay on the ground. After a moment of shock from all of us, they complied. I was able to call 911 and tell them my name and badge number. I had two at gunpoint and needed backup immediately. I gave our dispatcher the best directions I could to this field, and while on the phone, they both fled. Again. Stupid new cop young guy mentality, I chased them. I took off after the man who ran into the woods around the field. I chased him for maybe 30 seconds and heard 3 loud pops and saw a muzzle flash. My I'm invincible mentality went right out the window. I ran like hell back towards my car and peeled the hell out of there. I went back to the area I picked her up in, called dispatch again, and had officers come to that location. Of course, the first officers to pull up were my sergeant and my field training officer. Of course, they were both completely understanding and didn't give me any shit about it at all. The most used words were dumbass and stupid rookie. I hopped in their car and went towards the field. Luckily, the van was still there. I was told to shut my mouth and only come out if they start getting shot at. They cleared the area and started looking in the van. They found meth right on the center console and searched the car. What scared me the most was when my field training officer and sergeant came back to the patrol car, let me out, and told me to come look in the back of the van. Both of them were pale and looked horrified. I went to the back of the van where there were several knives, duct tape, lighter fluid, a decent amount of rifle ammunition, handcuffs, and what looked to be dried blood. In the front seat passenger side, we found an AR-15 style rifle and 2 more handguns. We called for immediate backup and detectives. When they investigated the blood, it turned out it wasn't blood. The plates had been stolen and the van was reported stolen. I still get shit about the whole encounter, but luckily, no one got hurt. I will never use online dating again. Ever. This was November 2016 in Glasgow, Scotland. I was desperate. I must admit I'd been single and alone for some time and it was driving me crazy. That's when I met Laura. She came across as a very sweet girl, and all but she was in a hurry to meet me, so I did. She insisted we go to the pub. No fancy dates were necessary to her. I didn't mind this. At first glance, I knew I'd been swindled. She looked different from what I'd seen before, but I didn't mind. I was just happy to have a date. I'm not exactly good-looking myself. I gave her a chance to redeem herself. We got talking, and after a few beers, things started to get more intimate. Before I go further, she was quite an overweight girl with long dark hair, and she had eyeshadow similar to Amy Winehouse. She said she was a huge fan. I'd asked about her hobbies and interests, etc., but she asked me to talk more about myself. I told her about my job, and she yawned sarcastically. "Let's talk about your sex life," she said. She had slipped her foot out of her shoe and started rubbing my groin with her bare foot. Needless to say, I was aroused. So yeah, I didn't have much to say in that department, as it had been a while since I had sex. I was very honest with her. I asked about hers, and she said she has her kinks and that she's done things that I'd never have imagined. "Want to see what I can do?" She said, "Let's go to my place." So at this point, I was starting to feel very drunk, which I was amazed at, as I was only onto my 4th pint. I did have 2 shots, though, and put it down to this. We waited for a taxi. She was holding my hand excitedly, whispering into my ear that she was going to do some things to me that I'd never experienced before. In a way, I actually couldn't wait to just sleep. My head felt heavier than the rest of my body. It was like the ground was moving beneath my feet. The rest was a blur. I couldn't even remember getting into the taxi, but I do remember falling down the stairs, and she was above me laughing. "Come on," she said. "Get your sexy ass up here." I struggled up the stairs, and before I knew it, from what I remember, I was in her bedroom naked. It was like I'd blacked out. I tried to sit up, only to find myself tied to the bed by my arms and legs. Then she entered the room dressed in bondage gear. I was deeply aroused but confused at the same time. She performed sex acts on me before having full intercourse. I lay there delighted, don't get me wrong, but something still felt off about it all. I dozed off for a bit, and I'd been woken up by a weird screeching sound. "What are you doing?" I'd said as she was wrapping up my legs with cling film. "Hush now," she said. "This is the best bit." I was no longer tied to the bed, but I felt very numb and couldn't move my arms and legs. She kept wrapping me up from my legs upwards. I was screaming at her to stop, and she had placed some cling film in my mouth to shut me up. I was struggling to breathe at this point, and had tried my best to dislodge the ball of cling film from my mouth. Eventually, I was wrapped from head to toe. I could barely see outside the cling film. She told me that this was my punishment for being terrible in bed, and that she has many other victims just like me, all wrapped up waiting to die. She left the room, and I'd give out some muffled screams. Then I felt myself slowly fading away. I woke up the next day and was now able to breathe. This time, people were looking at me. They'd removed most of the cling film and resuscitated me. I wasn't aware of this till they told me. It turned out that I wasn't actually in Laura's flat, but an old-fashioned hotel. The police were all over me, asking me questions about what had happened. I attempted to show them her Tinder profile, but she had deleted the page. I am grateful to my rescuers that had saved me, but I was forever traumatized by this incident, and I end up with panic attacks when I see people that are similar to her. It took me a few years to finally trust people enough to go on dates, but I'm still on the road to recovery mentally. I'm just glad that I'm still alive, but wondering if she's still out there, and if others like me didn't make it. When I just finished college, I was living in a 1-bedroom townhouse. I met a guy on a dating app, and at that time I wasn't exactly smart about my online digital footprint. Not like I've changed, but at least now I'm not as ridiculous. Anyways, he seemed like a decent guy. He was really good looking, said he had a good job, had nice teeth, and looked like he cared about his health. All things I would typically look for in a guy. I'm not a shallow human, but I like to be presentable, and if I'm with someone, I would like them to care about being presentable in a business environment also. After about a week of chatting online, we agreed to meet. We met at a restaurant downtown, which was far from where I lived. When I got there, I noticed him standing at the door. We sat down to eat, and the evening went great. At the end of the date, we said bye, and I got into my car and began to drive away. I realized right away that he was following me. Because of the distance to my house, I wasn't immediately scared because it's a big city. Maybe he'll turn off the freeway. He didn't. My exit was coming up, and I decided not to take it. I kept driving. I circled the entire city on the freeway, and he stayed right behind me. I was starting to panic a bit, so I decided to go to my friend's house instead of mine, and when I pulled out the exit, I noticed he didn't. So I had a little bit of a moment to breathe and decided, okay, screw it. I'll just go home. I took the off-ramp back onto the freeway and began going back to my exit. I got home and showered and was getting ready for bed, and I started feeling dumb because, was that him? Am I overreacting? Do I ask him if he was following me? Just several things were racing through my overactive imagination, or so I thought. I decided I was going to message him and just say, "Had a good time, good night." And when I started typing, all of a sudden a message came through to my phone with a picture of my car outside my house. I nearly died. My heart jumped out of my chest. I started shaking. I didn't know what to say, and he texts me and says, "I didn't know you lived across the street from me. I've met my neighbors, and not once have I ever met him. There's a huge apartment complex kitty corner to my townhouse, so maybe that's where he lived. I don't know." I popped up and went to look outside, and there he was, just standing outside like he was waiting for me. I opened the door and he asked if he could come in and if I wanted to still hang out. I told him I was exhausted and I'd rather just crash out as it had been a long day. The next morning I woke up to go to work and my windshield had been smashed, my car was keyed, and my back 2 tires were slashed. And as I was noticing the damage to my vehicle, the guy comes out of his car with 2 coffees and is like, "Oh, I thought I'd surprise you with a morning coffee." So again, I'm freaking out. I called the cops and reported the damage to my vehicle. This guy offered to drive me, and something in my gut was like, "Don't get in that car." So I called my boss, told them the situation, and explained I wasn't going to be there until after the police came. This guy just hung out the whole time, BTW. When the police finally got there, this guy was acting suspicious. He walked away and was hiding on the other side of his car. I filed the report and the police said, "Hope you have insurance," and they were on their way to leave. They pulled around the corner, and all I heard was the siren on the cops' lights turn on, and the cop screamed, "Freeze! Put your hands in the air and get down on your knees." I looked, and the cop got his gun drawn, and this dude on the ground getting arrested. I spoke with the cop after he got into the back, and he explained he was wanted for stalking, breach of probation, assault with a deadly weapon, fraud, and aggravated sexual assault. I was shocked. It took me a couple of days to get over the hypothetical situations that could have happened. About a week later, I was on my way out the door to work, and guess who was sitting in my driveway? We live in Canada, so essentially, you're released on conditions until you go to jail. I told him I was late for work, but that I'd call him when I was done working. I never went to work that day. I went and found a new apartment in another area of the city. I also changed my phone number and hired my friend's husband and his friends to go pack my apartment up and move it to their place for a month, and then move it to my new place, because I was so scared this dude would follow them while moving. That's all we got from today's stories. Let me know what you thought of each individual story. Thanks for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe because you would not want to miss the next story the Haunted Sketchbook got in store for you.